Good evening, everyone. It's good to look out and see your smiling faces, except David wasn't smiling till I said that. But he did. He smiled. Scott had to work evening shift in his regular job last night, tonight, and tomorrow night. And so he asked me if I'd teach the class. I told him I would. So we'll just go back to Proverbs. I always have a lesson ready in Proverbs. So that's what we'll do tonight. Brother David House is going to open our class with a prayer, and then we'll get started. Brother David? Thanks, David. We're in Proverbs 23 tonight, if you'd like to open your Bibles to that location. I used to keep a marker there. There it is. No, that's back in Numbers. There it is. I got 3 markers, so I had to check all of them. And so we're in Proverbs 23, and the last time we were in Proverbs, we got down to verse 24. So let me mark that for future reference. So tonight's the 18th, right? Okay. And as we mentioned before, for about 3 chapters, the way these Proverbs were written, they're grouped together in 2 or 3, sometimes a little bit longer than that, verses at a time that kind of have a central thought. And so in this particular section, it's 24, 25, and 26 that go together. So I'll go ahead and read those, and then we'll discuss them. Verse 24 says, "The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. Thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways." So those 3 verses kind of go together, have a central thought there, and it's repeating a thought that we've seen multiple times in Proverbs. And when we go back to chapter 1, Solomon is writing these things to his son. Now, with all the wives and concubines that he had, I'm sure he had several sons, so I'm not really sure which son he's writing to here, but he's writing it to his son. And of course, these words have come down to us through inspiration, and even though we're not governed by the Old Testament anymore, there's still a lot of things we can learn from the Old Testament, especially when we look at these sayings of the wisest man that mere human, let me put it that way. He wasn't as wise as Jesus, but he's the wisest mere human that walked the earth. And so when we look at the writings that he was putting together for his son and for people of his time, there's all kinds of nuggets of wisdom to help us today, even though we're 3,500 years separated from the actual writing of these verses. Okay, and so periodically through the book, we see specific references to either his son or relationship between father and son or parents and children, and so here we have another one. Proverbs 10:1 has a similar comment. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, "A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother." So it's just a similar thought as to what we have here tonight in chapter 23. I know any of us who have had children can relate to these words, I think, very well. Because when our kids did well, I'm looking at Bud there with these suspenders. I don't have any. But, you put your thumbs there in your suspenders and you're grinning. Look at my kid, what they've done. Whether it's in academics or in athletics or in life in general, we're always happy to talk about how well our kids are doing, how well they did in school, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Now, what we don't spend too much time talking about are the problems that our kids have. Okay? But when we look at what Solomon says here about the father of the righteous, okay? And here we're talking righteous. When our children obey God, we're tickled pink. When they don't, we're crushed. And so Solomon here is just making the statement that we greatly rejoice when we're the parents of kids that do right. And he says, he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. When our kids do the right thing, when they exhibit wisdom, sometimes it shocks us, but we're tickled. It just makes our day when they do the right thing, when they exhibit wisdom. One of my children, I won't mention the name, for years hasn't been the wisest person when it comes to finances. But that I'm going to refrain from using pronouns. That person is doing a lot better now, and it makes his mother, his mother. I really tried. His mother and I really happy. He's 34, but he's starting to make some really wise decisions, and especially about his finances. And so, we're really, really happy about that. So it does bring us joy. Steve? That's okay.
We know that Solomon had a lot of kids, a lot of wives. Not all of them were so wise, as we learn, from the Bible. There were those who trickled the Torah.
And that's especially true with David. Okay? Yeah, with David.
Well, I'm thinking of,
You may be thinking about David? Okay.
but Solomon had those that split
Similar things.
that split the Jewish tribes,
Yeah,
went on to worship idols. The many wives that Solomon had, those that worship idols.
Yeah, led to that type of thing. And that's a good point, that under Solomon's children, the kingdom split. Okay, and those of us that have gone through church splits know how terrible it is, and it's probably even magnified for a nation to split. And it was Solomon's children that were involved in that split, and that never got reconciled. Family members weren't able to reconcile, and it stayed. For a while it was Israel, 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 Israel. Now it's Judah and Israel. And it stayed that way forever. Okay, they never reconciled. And then the Assyrians carried those 10 northern tribes off into captivity, and they basically never came back. And the reason the Israelites were then people started calling them Jews, was because the only thing that was left was Judah and Benjamin kind of got swallowed up in Judah. And so Jew was a kind of a shortening of Judah. We kind of use the term Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable. But it was a split, and it arose in Solomon's family and never was reconciled. What's that? Not too wise, no. So, verse 25 says, thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. And that's kind of going back and contrasting with what we just read from Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1, that a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son. We talked a little bit about this when we were back in chapter 10. A foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Well, he's the heaviness of his dad too. And a wise son not only makes the father glad, but he makes the mother glad too. And so here in verse 25 it says, thy mother and thy father shall be glad. She that bare thee shall rejoice. So these are admonitions to a son. If the son shows wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and he follows God, it makes his mom and dad glad, right? If they're followers of God, makes his mom and dad glad. But it also does great things for him too. Okay? And so here Solomon is saying, if you do the right thing, you'll make us happy. But, in other places, he'll say, and you'll benefit too. Verse 26, my son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. Psalm 119:24 says this, thy testimonies also are my delights and my counselors. Now, in that psalm, where the thy testimonies being my counselor, that's talking about God. Okay, but what Solomon is saying in verse 26 to his son is, basically, you follow me like I'm a follower of God. Okay? Isn't that what Paul said? Be ye imitators of me as I am of Christ. Okay, Paul says, I'm following Christ. You guys ought to follow my example. And Solomon said the same thing thousands of years ago. Any comments on those three verses? Because we're going to radically shift gears here in just a minute.
Another thing's not added, but it makes the rest of the family, brother and sister.
And how they get along.
Right.
Yeah. And if they both listen to their parents and follow the teaching of their parents and follow the teachings of God, which is what we're reflecting back to, hopefully they'll get along. Now, do all of us always get along? Probably not. Probably not. But we ought to work at it, And the New Testament plainly tells us if we have aught against our brother, go to him. See if you can straighten it out. Now, people will have personalities, and some personalities might not get along that great with other personalities. Well, then do the best you can. I'm sure I rub some of you the wrong way, but bear with me. God ain't done with me yet. He's still working on me. He created the worlds and the universe in 6 days, and 72 and a half years later, he's still working on me. But, the point is, we all ought to treat each other with Christian love. We ought to be willing to do anything for each other, even though sometimes we get on each other's nerves. Okay? So, let's switch gears here, because we're going to hit two topics that are totally different than what we've been talking about, other than the fact that if you follow God's teachings, you won't get involved in the last parts of this chapter. Okay, so the next verses that go together are 27, 28. Okay, 27. For a whore is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. Now, if you get into the commentaries on this particular verse, and we all know another word for whore is prostitute, okay? And this strange woman, the commentators say that he's talking about an adulteress here. Okay, it could also easily be a fornicator. All women who get in to illicit affairs are not all married. Some of them are single. Okay? So if they're single, they're not an adulterer. Now, sometimes they get involved with a married man, which makes him an adulterer. But she would be a fornicator if she's single and is doing illicit sexual activity. Oh, a lot, yeah. A lot of trouble. Okay, so what he's saying here is a whore or a prostitute is a deep ditch. And the idea there, I think we can all understand, is, if you're driving down the road and getting a deep ditch, you got problems, right? If you're walking through a field and you trip into a deep ditch, you got problems. It is hard to get out of. A lot of times it's easy to get in and hard to get out. And so that's what Solomon is saying here. If you were walking through a field, you would avoid the deep ditch. You're trying to find some way to cross it easily. Okay? Do the same thing when it comes to either a prostitute or, he's talking to his son here. We're going to turn around and turn this to women too, okay? But he's talking to his son. Avoid a prostitute, avoid an adulterous woman, or I don't know what the adjective would be, but a woman who is involved in fornication, okay? You don't want to get tied up with those kind of folks. And avoid it like you would a deep ditch. And what does he say about the strange woman? A narrow pit. Okay, that's kind of even scarier, I think, at least to me, than a deep ditch. Deep ditch kind of gives me an idea I might be able to climb out of it. But a narrow pit, you fall down like a whale, an old dug well. You fall down a well, you may not get out.
That's what the ESV says, a narrow well.
A narrow well, okay? Old timers, and I have one on my farm, either they would dig them or they had a well digger would come and dig them a well, and they'd dig it down about 20 feet, and they'd line it in a circle with rocks, field stones, okay, and the water would seep in, and they'd have a source of water. Well, those things can be dangerous. I've read of several occasions where people buy a piece of property, they have an old well, they decide they want to clean it out, they put somebody down in the well, they get to what they call mucking it out, okay? So they put down a bucket on a rope and they take a shovel and they start digging that muck at the bottom, trying to get this well clean. What they do is they liberate hydrogen sulfide. And after that first initial rotten egg smell, it paralyzes their olfactory nerves. They can't smell anymore, so they thought, well, I hit a bad pocket of something, I'm okay now, but they're still breathing hydrogen sulfide and they collapse. I read an article in the newspaper several years ago. 3 members of a family died in a well. 2 of them were on top. 1 was down in the well. He collapsed. 1 went down to get him. He collapsed. The 3rd one went down to get the other 2, and he collapsed. Now all 3 ended up dead. So, a narrow pit ought to scare anybody. And so here Solomon is likening these adulterous type relationships to a deep ditch or a narrow pit that's easy to fall into, hard to get out of.
Hey, Rick,
Uh-huh.
Joseph was put in a pit by his brothers.
And he couldn't get out on his own, could he? That's the kind of idea there, It's very difficult to get out on your own. And so what they did was they left him in there for a while and then hauled him out and sold him to the Ishmaelite caravan. It turned him into a slave. Now, let me point this out before I forget it, because I will. Wasn't there another deep pit awaiting Joseph in Egypt? Exactly like what Solomon's talking about here. It was an actual deep pit that his brothers put him in, but when he got to Egypt, Potiphar's wife tried to entice him into a deep pit, and he fled. Remember, he fled from the house and left his outer garment in her hands as she grasped him as he tried to flee. But that's exactly what Solomon's talking about here. It would have been an adulterous relationship, right? And he fled it.
But what a great man he became.
Oh, certainly. And he rose from, most people would have perished under those conditions. But he trusted God, and God used him to do a great work.
He became
Second in command of Egypt. And at that time, Egypt was one of the strongest nations in the world. And he was second in command. Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah was in the pit too. He was thrown in the pit.
Okay.
Somebody got him out.
Yeah. And Daniel,
Yeah.
the impression you get with that was kind of like a pit. Because remember what happened when he made it through the night and the king came, as soon as it got daylight, the king rushed there because he really liked Daniel. And what happened to Daniel's accusers? They were thrown in the same lion's den, and the lions had attacked them before they even reached the bottom. So that kind of gets the idea of a pit. So pits figure in a lot of scriptures. And then they use it as a metaphor. Okay? They draw a picture of something and then make a spiritual type application to it. Proverbs 22:14, which we've looked at several months ago, says, "The mouth of strange women is a deep pit. He that is abhorred of the Lord shall fall therein." Okay? Again, this mention we've seen in Proverbs, a mention of this deep pit. A strange woman and her wiles are like a deep pit, and the Lord doesn't think much of the person that gets caught up in that. It's what Proverbs 22:14 says. Verse 28 says, "She also lieth in wait as for prey, and increaseth the transgressors among men." Yeah, yes. And, if you look at the last part of that verse, "increaseth the transgressors among men." Now, are the men blameless here? Absolutely not. They're not blameless. They can, Joseph didn't fall for the wiles of Potiphar's wife. She laid in prey for him, but he didn't succumb to it. So, you can't absolve the man of this behavior just because the woman laid a trap for him. Okay, so now we've talked about the strange woman, all right? But it applies equally to men. Do men chase after women? I heard somebody say, they sure do. They do, okay? Women try to entice men. Men chase after women. God doesn't like either one. Some societies, I think, tend to absolve the man, but that's wrong. They're equally culpable in these situations. Ecclesiastes 7:26 says, "And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her." Okay? Again, he's talking to his son, so he's telling him to beware these women. Okay? I'm sure he gave similar lectures to his daughters. And flipped the narrative. Okay. Any questions or comments? All right. Verses 29 through 35. Now, we've been doing these 2 and 3 at a time, but now we've got 6 or 7 that go together. And this is talking about alcohol. I'll go ahead and read them all, and then we'll go back and talk to them a little bit. I got several references to go to. Who hath woe? Verse 29. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. They have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again. That last phrase, that last sentence, is the saddest sentence in all of that reading. Once they sober up, they seek it yet again.
I've experienced every word of it. I gotta tell you, I have a strong aversion, and I just hate to see anybody go down the road.
Yeah, when Randy was younger and not a Christian, and if you didn't hear what he says, I've experienced every one of those statements. So at one time in his life, Randy did partake of alcoholic beverages, and he said that, he lived those 7 verses, I guess.
Every word of it.
Every word of it, okay? He doesn't now, and now he says he has a strong aversion to alcohol, and I'm sure he tells everybody he has a chance to avoid it. I had a younger cousin. His dad was my mom's brother, youngest brother. And he was younger than me, and he, as a young person, was not religious, and he drank heavily. Like a lot of people drink a lot of beer, he drank hard whiskey in the same types of volumes. He ended up developing cirrhosis of the liver and then liver cancer, and died a couple years ago of liver cancer. And he and his family asked me to speak at his funeral. I didn't conduct the whole service. I just helped, and I kind of did the family part. And he had asked me before he died if I can convey 3 messages to the mourners, to the people who came. He said, tell them, number 1, if they drink, quit. Number 2, if they don't drink, don't start. And number 3, get right with God. Those were the 3 messages he wanted broadcast at his funeral, and I broadcast them. But his disease was directly attributable to his drinking, to his years of hard drinking. And once he quit, the damage had been done. So, when you look at these verses together, they paint a terrible picture. They really do. And, sometimes you find a little humor in really sad things, but one of the humorous things of this passage is it's like you're on the top of a mast. Okay, now if you think about that, the mast of a ship that holds the sails, okay? Can you imagine sitting on the top of a mast, and even in a gentle sea, you're going to be doing this? And that's what it's saying you feel like. Any emotion that you have is amplified. Kaufman, I use him some, and he hit really hard moderate or social drinking in his commentary, that just leave it alone. And really that's the best advice that you could give anybody. Just leave it alone. I had a health class in high school, and David House probably had the same health class, and I'm sure I think they had the boys and the girls separated, so Karen probably wasn't in there with us, but did they talk to you all about drinking too? Okay, we had to take a test at the end of it, And one of the questions I missed was, what's the best way not to become an alcoholic? One of the answers was, never take the first drink. That's what I checked. And the answer that the answer book had was, develop a strong personality. So, you guys know me, I argued with the teacher. I said, that's stupid. See, I wasn't attacking the teacher, I was attacking the book, okay? And their point was, if you develop a strong personality, you won't be led by your buddies out to drinking parties and things. They had a point, okay? But my point was, if you never take the first drink, I'll guarantee you, you're never going to get drunk. No way. You know, the road to becoming an alcoholic starts with the first drink. So they took off points on my test. Hurt my feelings. Yeah, especially while you're drinking. You know, mild-mannered people will develop real strong personalities while they're drinking. James?
The point of altogether is, London is a drug. It is a liquid drug, is what it is.
Yep, it is.
I have known people that all they want to do is fight when they get drunk. That's one of the things, the side effect of it.
And, you know, that's pointed out in these scriptures. They have stricken me. They have beaten me. Okay? And I felt it not. But he wakes up all bruised and sore, right? And there are some other points like that. Verse 32 says, at the last it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. I don't know how many of you saw the Disney movie. I'm mad at Disney these days. But anyway, saw the Disney movie Cars. And it's, you know, it's about race cars. The whole thing it's cartoons and stuff, but it's race cars. Huh? And he's the star of the show. Larry the Cable Guy is Mater, Tow Mater without the tow. You know, he was a tow truck, and he was hilarious. But anyway, the star of the show is Lightning McQueen, and he talks about what? Floating like a Cadillac, stinging like a Beamer, or something like that, okay? And when I read that one about biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder, it reminds me of Lightning McQueen. But it does. It's my cousin, I thought, had some good advice. If you drink, stop. If you don't drink, don't start.
It's not just alcohol nowadays, though, it's all the drugs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My son, he's a drug addict, coach, and he had a gentleman that got clean. He was really up into the helping the other people.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't had anything to consider for years, but he ended up dying from what he said.
Yeah.
He could be clean, he's been clean for 20-some years, the damage had already been done.
I had a young man that was on my soccer teams when I was a soccer coach, and he had an older brother who was a classmate of Ricky's, and he got into drugs and he died of an overdose when his parents thought he was clean, that he had gone through rehab. Yeah. And a lot of times it only takes just one, and you're back in it. So, you know, the best advice to anybody, just leave it all alone. People of my age, okay, Anna, David, Karen, and I all graduated in the same year, and I'm not going to tell you what year it is. Anna and Karen are grinning at me, so I better not. But anyway, we all graduated in the same year, and David and Karen and I all graduated from St. Albans High School. When we were going to school, alcohol was the big problem for young people. Marijuana pretty much had not been heard of. You know, it was alcohol. And then my younger brothers, it was marijuana and alcohol.
1967.
67. And 67 is what?
When you graduated?
I can't tell you. Because that's when Anna and Karen graduated.
I just going back. He's saying they all flunked.
Yeah, they all flunked and didn't graduate till 68. Not really. Not really. But you know, my younger brothers faced marijuana and alcohol, and then now it's crystal meth, cocaine, heroin, alcohol, and marijuana. I mean, you know, now it just piles on. And then, you know, hydrocodone, you know, abusing prescription drugs is a big problem. That's one of the problems that we face here in West Virginia with them pushing those things.
One more you forgot, all the drugs all together, putting
All like what they call a drug cocktail or something like that.
it's heavy today.
Fentanyl. Yeah, I forgot fentanyl.
Mac is what it's called.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that by another name. Yeah. Yeah, so our young people really face a lot more than what we had to face when we were their age. You know, talking about my cohort and people a little bit older and a little bit younger than me. The young people, they have to face a lot more than we had to face.
They said, some of them makes them want to fight, then some makes them silly.
Well,
It's not funny, it breaks your heart.
it does. And some of them makes them sleepy. So you got sleepy drunks, you got silly drunks, you got belligerent drunks. Okay? Yeah, that's the belligerent drunks. They want to fight. As soon as they get a few beers in them, they want to fight. You know, Solomon hits it right on the nose. Okay? And let me give you a couple more references here. Isaiah, I think it's 5. Let me get my glasses out. Let me get my vain glasses out here. 5. Isaiah 5:11 says, "Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may fall a strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflame them." You know, as far as I know, back during the time of Solomon, the time of Isaiah, they didn't have distilled spirits. I think their strongest intoxicant was wine. Okay, it took a little bit later down the road before people learned that you could concentrate the alcohol that is in wine and other such liquids by distilling them, heating them until that material evaporates, then cooling them and collecting what you cool. Okay, so when you take a wine and distill it, you get a port or a sherry. Now, I'm not a drinker, but I've studied the bacteriological reactions that create wine. All right? We use similar biological reactions to treat sewage. It may be that they go together. I don't want to go there. But to get what we'd call hard liquor, like whiskey, what we do is we take corn, grind it up, add some sugar and some yeast, and we create a corn wine. And then we distill that, and we get bourbon. We, in a sense, not me, but we as a society, okay? If you want vodka, there's a sign down the road that says, "We support Ukraine, there's no Russian vodka served here," okay? If you want vodka, you do the same thing with potatoes. You make a potato wine, and then you distill it, and then you create vodka. If you want rum, you take sugar cane. Do the same thing. I don't think the people of Solomon's day had that knowledge, had figured out that you could take a wine and distill it and make it more potent. And so,
They did have good drinking water like we do.
well, and I think that's why you see people back in those days drinking alcoholic beverages, because they were relatively safe from a standpoint of getting disease. They cause drunkenness if you drank too much, but you wouldn't get some of the diseases that were transmitted through water. Yeah.
Today we have poverty. The winos, we go through town. I know I see them on the streets. Winos, they can only
cheap stuff. A lot of the homelessness in this country is caused by alcohol. It's caused by drugs. Isaiah 5, I got two more scriptures. That's just first bell, right, Mike? Yes. Thank you. Isaiah 5:22, same chapter, but just a few verses later says, "Woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink." I think the idea there is, you don't want your soldiers that are protecting you to be off drinking. Okay, because it would be a whole lot easier to defeat a drunk adversary than one who is sober, vigilant, things like that. Now, later on in Proverbs, it talks about giving strong drink to those who are about to die. Okay? And, they've kind of invented hospice care way back during Solomon's days. You take care of people who are about to die by giving them pain relief. And it does talk about giving strong drink to those types of people. But other than that, Solomon condemns drinking. And I think he's very descriptive here. And the other one I wanted to look at was Song of Solomon, chapter 7, verse 9. "And the roof of thy mouth, like the best wine for my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak." And then another verse here says, verse 33 of Proverbs says, "Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things." Okay, so both in Song of Solomon, which Solomon wrote, and here in Proverbs, which he wrote most of them, most of Proverbs, it talks about people under the influence saying things they wouldn't say if they weren't under the influence. And that can create problems. That can create problems. So there's lots of things that aren't good that can be caused by drinking. And Solomon points out a lot of them. But our society is plagued with that and drugs. The last, I missed the one. I'm going to give you this one. Jeremiah 5:3 says, "O Lord, are not thine eyes upon the truth? Thou hast stricken them, but they have not grieved. Thou hast consumed them, but they have refused to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to return." The idea, I think, here is that even though drinking causes them all kinds of problems, they won't leave it. They just, like that one verse said, they seek it yet again.